And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Kim Christfort. She's Chief Innovation Leader and National Managing Director at Deloitte Greenhouse Experience. She's an author, a strategist, an experience designer, and an innovation speaker. She's got a book out called The Breakthrough Manifesto, 10 Principles to Spark Transformative Innovation. And we get to chat with her for a bit today. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks. So let me ask you this. So what's your journey? What's your path been, right? Because I don't think anybody X number of years ago when they're starting careers said, I want to be a thought leader. I want to run innovation at Deloitte. So how did this all happen?
It's funny you say that because I think the story sounds better in reverse than it did from the start. I would not have guessed I would be here. I actually come from a background of theater and science. So I was a pre-med undergrad, but I did a ton of performing arts. And when
Could have been like Bill Nye the Science Guy.
I don't think I can be as cool as Bill Nye the Science Guy, but I definitely have
Maybe
aspirations in that direction.
Maybe
Exactly. Maybe one day. We'll keep trying.
I'll send you a bow tie. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I was sort of on this path of doing something in medicine. I loved problem solving. I loved interacting with people and really being helpful in that way. But I was missing this ability to tap into my creative side as well. And, when I landed at Deloitte, it was really more because I realized medicine probably wasn't the best route for me in terms of some of my interests. And so I was going down the problem solving path and still didn't have the creativity side. And so over time, I kept looking for opportunities to weave in the different things. And really, my current job was created by me for me, with a lot of people who help bring it to life. But it was meant to be a synthesis, not only of my passions, but of people's brains. We are all very intellectual people in the business world, but we also have creative, human, emotional sides too. And so it was a way to bring those things together.
So stay there for a minute, because I don't think it's as unusual, at least in my world, as you think it is, that many of the people that I work with, that I speak with, that we support, their quote job, if they have a day job, was created for them. It wasn't like they were the 11th person to be the, SVP of refrigerated supply chain. I think that's actually sort of in an uncommon way common, particularly in professional services. Like the spark goes off, they have an interest, they're passionate, they happen to be a good speaker or a good writer or whatever, and the firm or whatever finds places for them. And then you're like, oh, but we have to give them a job and a title. And do they have direct reports? And probably a budget would be lovely. And I think a lot of people have, creativity applies to the role that you've actually created. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And I think part of it was, in the early parts of my career, people were definitely trying to figure out, how do we leverage her in different ways? And how do we sort of, as you say, create something that would bring that to life? And then as I advanced in my career, then it was me saying, I know you asked me to do this, but what I actually should do is this other thing, which will give you everything you want and more. And that's really what the Greenhouse was. I mean, Greenhouse originally was a space strategy. It was an idea of having a space to bring people together and do, whatever it is they wanted to do. It could have been learning and development. It could have been innovation. And when they brought me in to lead it, it was an operational role. And I said, yeah, about that. Here's what I think it could be. And so we've turned it into a engine really for innovation and transformation much more broadly versus just managing real estate.
Well, and it used to be, because I was visiting one of them in I think it was Chicago years ago, but it used to be almost the showroom or a physical come to this place and we'll blow your mind kind of thing. Then this little thing called COVID happened. So that kind of didn't work, right? So I like what you said. It's more like an engine or it's a place that's not a place, right?
Exactly. I mean, what we found, and luckily we discovered this pre-COVID even, because what we found is it's not about the space, it's about the experience. And the space is a petri dish for us. It lets us, or maybe a more pleasant term since we're talking about Canvas or COVID, let's go away from petri dishes. But, a more pleasant term is it's our stage. That's where we're able to set the environment. But what we're really doing is diagnosing what is holding this group back. How do we then create an experience in this space potentially, but even outside of it? COVID was a great example of creating experiences without physical space. And that activation of the brain through immersion, whether that's actual literal immersion or whether that's doing things through a virtual setting is what we found to be the key.
So how, whether it's Deloitte or you can talk more generally, how are decisions made around metrics and give this more and give this less? So they're right. So certain parts of businesses, it's easy to say, kill this, feed this, try this. Like, what are you measured against? What are the KPIs against? Because they're making significant investments in terms of the book and your time and the people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So impact.
And getting huge value back, I feel compelled to add. But
Yes.
yes, I laugh at the metrics question because I think people, especially in Deloitte, where we have a strong accounting practice, they like to count things. What can we count
Yes.
here? And when we're talking about experiences, what I don't want, so the metric I avoid is how many sessions have you done?
Right.
Because volume is not ROI. And so,
Stay
yes.
there for a minute because it's so funny because I've seen this time and time again where it's, you don't measure thought leadership by the pound. So more is not necessarily better than less, right? So, if you put out one piece a week, two would be double. So why don't we get you to do three? And ultimately,
Exactly.
yeah.
No, I think you're so right because volume tends to be our sort of easy metric across the board, whether it's thought leadership or the kinds of things that we do.
How many
But
widgets, right? Like
how many widgets? Exactly.
how many things do
Exactly.
we produce? Right.
But I mean, even with other spaces, if I even put the sort of thought leadership and experience piece to the side, even other spaces aren't always measured on utilization. You think of a stadium or an amazing theater, it's about that incredible moment. It's not necessarily about keeping it busy all the time. So I don't like that metric. The metric that is actually an interesting one that I think has served us quite well is repeat usage. So if we have people coming back again and again and again and willing to invest their time and money to use us, they must be seeing value out of it. I like that one because it's
Repeat
indirect.
usage. Wait, so repeat usage meaning ongoing engagements.
Well, not even of sold projects necessarily. So the way we
Mhm.
exist to really spark new thinking, to
Yes.
accelerate decision making, to do a lot of things that may not have an immediate payoff. It's sort of longer term business development kinds of things. And so if the people within Deloitte or their clients say, wow, that session was so helpful or that conversation was so useful, I want to come back in, great. Because
Okay.
that has a back end assumption built into it, which says they used it for something that gave them enormous value. Now, I also try to measure the long term value. Was a client able to actually transform their organization?
Sure.
Was our account team able to deepen their relationship? So we do look at things like that. But I think that indirect method of looking at usage is actually one that's overlooked sometimes and a really
I
great
love that
signal.
because it's easy to deal with the lazy vanity metrics of, oh, how many downloads? And it's like, okay, so if you got X number of downloads on this piece, well, who's downloading it? If it's a bunch of undergrads in Iowa, well, that's not really to the business, right? And I think people don't, it's just such an easy way to look at, oh, this got more than that, therefore it's better. And it's really the composition of, as opposed to the quantity of when it comes to those things, because certain pieces that you're producing from a thought leadership perspective, the universe of who it's really relevant and important to might be fairly small, like hundreds, maybe the total universe. So if you got 30 people looking at it, like as a percentage, that could be phenomenal versus,
For
a bigger,
sure.
yeah.
For sure. And I think I'm probably making my life harder on myself than I need to by insisting on these other metrics. I mean, I could absolutely get my volume metrics up, as you say, by
Right,
silliness. I
right.
bring people in for random things or get random downloads. But I think that, we really believe that there's a ripple effect to all of this. And
Yes.
so if I reach the right people in the right time in a moment that matters to them, and this
Mhm.
concept of moments that matter, that's a big concept we use all the time. If I reach somebody in a moment that matters, that's going to have impact not only on them, but on their teams, on their organizations, and hopefully eventually the broader world.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave a 5-star review at ratethispodcast.com/LTL and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcasts and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com www.manifesto.com/podcast. So stay with that moments that matter, because what I think is when you're in professional services, we always have the supply, theoretically. The demand is questionable as to, at a moment in time, whatever the professional services you are, now all of a sudden you go from being, I was completely irrelevant to them yesterday, to I'm the most relevant thing in the world today based on an event or a meeting or whatever. So I love these moments that matter because you consistently have to get stuff out in front of people to keep the awareness going on. And then eventually it's you get them, it's out of your control, that moment that matters typically, right?
That's exactly right. And this idea of thinking about things in terms of moments that matter was actually the work of my former colleague and mentor, Brian Fuger. But what
Mhm.
he said is moments are all around us. They're opportunities. And some moments are very obvious and they're coming to you. So, for instance, one of the ones we talk about quite a bit is a client in transition. I either got promoted to a new job or maybe I'm switching organizations. Like that is a moment that matters to
Yeah.
that person, but it's there, it's in front of you. You can see it and do something about it. And that can lead to all sorts of other things. But the other kind of moment that I think is as interesting and often overlooked is moments you make. So you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have that transition happening. And to your point, maybe there's attention elsewhere and they're not focused on you and you're the last thing on their to-do list. How do I make a moment? And I think thought leadership has a huge role to play in making moments if it's really tailored to that person. So you may be the last thing on their list, but you happen to know that something's happening in their industry or there was an interesting announcement and you relate what you've done in thought
Right.
leadership to that thing, proactively providing it with no expectation of anything in return. It's simply a, hey, thought of you, thought this might be relevant. Here's the reasons. And by the way, that could be my own thought leadership or it could be somebody else's. You're just
Yeah,
providing
so
value.
I think people often don't understand the power of relationship development and such vis-a-vis thought leadership. Because if you're kind of on my radar as maybe you could be a client at some point in time, right? Well, I can do the quarterly, is now a good time for us to chat email that nobody wants,
Right.
or in an unpredictable way from a time standpoint, send you stuff that's really insightful, whether it's something I created or something, hey, read this piece based on our last call. I know you're struggling with that. Thought this would be cool, whatever. That's a way to stay top of mind. And even when you're creating thought leadership, like a book, like an article, say, can we grab a couple minutes to talk about this? Because I know you have a perspective and I'm doing a series on this or a book or white paper, whatever it is. That's a call people will often take versus can we do the check-in where I try to sell you some stuff and you try to avoid being sold? Because that's no.
That's exactly right. And it's Goldilocks principle, right? Like you don't want too much, you don't want too little, you want just right. And just right may not only be quantity, it may also be it is personalized to whatever they are trying to do in that moment. And so
Yeah.
I had an example of this earlier today. I was talking about the new book, the Breakthrough Manifesto with someone and we wanted to do an event. And the person was like, "Oh, okay, a book event, a fireside chat, like fine." I said, "Actually, here's what I was thinking. It's actually not a fireside chat about the book. It's a fireside chat about the issues that people are facing in this particular industry and how the book can actually help to accelerate pipeline." Because I knew that
Not
audience
about
was really
you, it's
concerned
not
about
about,
sales.
right.
Not
It's
about
not
me,
about
not
my
about the
book.
book. Yeah.
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 No, I love that because oftentimes, authors do that, say, hey, I'm in book mode. And the client's like, well, I don't care what mode you're in. Like, what's in it? How does this relate to me? But if you say the principles in the book, when applied to this population, could give you this benefit, which is
It's the
which is
so
a good
what part.
segue, which is a good segue into book. Nice plug, by the way. Um, so give me just the high level overview of how the decision's made, and then why you decide to write a book, and then what the expectation is, because I think there's a lot of fuzziness around that in many places or with many authors.
Yeah. Yeah. So this book really came about because for more than a decade, our group had been doing work to get people, their teams, the leaders to break through. And this concept of breakthrough, we found to be really interesting. It's a different take on innovation. It's saying, whether you're inventing some amazing new phenomenon or you're just transforming your organization in some way, it often requires breaking away or breaking down whatever is holding you back, getting out of that status quo and moving through, making momentum to something different. And so for 10 years, we've been doing this, but all of the research that we'd been gathering and that we'd been utilizing from outside had never really been codified, and it had
Okay.
never been packaged up in a way that we could talk about it. And that's why it's called a manifesto. We realized, part of this is about being very transparent and really owning our beliefs in a visible public way.
Mhm.
And that has several benefits. That lets us be consistent as an organization with how we're doing
Sure.
this, but it also lets other people say, that idea of making a mess or not playing nice, like that's intriguing. Let me do more. And so as we started packaging this up into principles, we got a lot of interest from our clients because we said, yeah, this is the way we do things. And they said, that's great. We'd like to do that too.
Right.
And the book was really a response to that. It was a way for us to take that and put it out in the world. Now, one thing that we did differently about this book was we did it in two halves. So the first half is talking about the 10 principles themselves. The
Sure.
second half is actual methods. So we said, if we're going to put
Okay.
this out in the world, we don't want people to buy it and put it on a shelf, although
Right.
buying it is always nice, but we want them to actually use it more like a field guide, if you will, like actually take it
Sure.
off the shelf, flip through and do something different.
I love that. And implied in a manifesto often is it's a movement, right? So people lean in to manifestos because it speaks to them. They're like, "Oh my God, this is the thing," right? You go back to some of the Checklist Manifesto or Agile Manifesto or whatever. They take on like a almost a cult like craziness to them in a good way. Like once somebody sort of becomes a raving fan of the manifesto, they're like, oh, they give it to the people that they know. You got to check this out, right? Like they become your best advocate and best fan. I'm a big fan of manifestos. I think when you design them well and deploy them well and use them to increase awareness, engage folks, and then ultimately get them to some sort of a call to action, it's pretty cool. There's a secret handshake part of it. It's
I'll have to show you that later. Yes, it's very
yeah,
secret.
yeah, yeah.
No, I
So
love your description of it as a movement. And I think that's so critical to what we're talking about because this book is not about point in time innovation and transformation. It's really about the
right,
broader journey. And the journey requires bringing people along and getting them to lean in, as you are describing. And so having a manifesto that is able to help drive that movement and drive that momentum and drive that enthusiasm is critical because innovation's tough, transformation is tough, and you need to have a sustained effort to get there, and you need to have other people along on the journey.
when it's usually some outliers inside of an org trying to convince others to do it. So when they find their tribe, when they find their peeps, like, wow, everybody here is kind of crazy like me, and they get it, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I think there's a natural sort of human peer-to-peer community, found my tribe, that sort of vibe that happens as well. If you do it well. If you don't do it well, it's like anything else. Like, wow, that was pretty awful, right? But
No, that's true. And it's why we've tried to use really evocative language with the
yeah,
principles so that they are a little bit stickier. But it's interesting because I think sometimes there's a lot of talk about the importance of a culture of innovation. Our organization needs to have a culture of innovation. But oftentimes what people mean by that is either, come on, come up with some good ideas, like quickly, like come on, innovate, go
hurry
innovate,
up, hurry up, yeah.
hurry up. Or it's
How long can it take?
exactly. Or it's like, we're going to have a few people who are really creative and the rest of you are going to like head nod and be on board with them. But, that's the culture, right? It's not really what you do on a day-to-day basis. So
Yeah, so
I
true.
think that the manifesto, to your point about finding the tribe and bringing people along, it makes it easier for everybody to be part of the tribe because it's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd push on that is it doesn't have to, I mean, everybody doesn't need to be everybody, right?
Correct. I mean, it is interesting. I think we found that there are big B breakthroughs and little B breakthroughs, right? So big B breakthroughs are like giant organizational transformations that may require not everybody, but a lot of people to get on board because it's change at such a fundamental level. But then
Mhm.
there's little B breakthroughs, which is like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for like X way for a long time, and I really need to shift to do it Y way. And that's my little personal light bulb moment, my little personal
Yep,
breakthrough.
yep,
Nobody else needs to be part of that. It's my moment for me.
right. And breakthrough moments are better than breakdown moments, but
That is
that's a
definitely
separate
that is
show.
definitely true.
Yeah, that's a separate show. So anyway, this has been great. Any final words of wisdom or things to share?
I think the final thought would just be that breakthrough is not something that is necessarily serendipitous. It's something that you are very open to. And the starting point probably of all of these principles is just curiosity. So I would recommend that anyone who wants to take this kind of journey just be starting to look around the world differently, and that will have a fundamental difference in how their path progresses.
Love it. Love it. Well, this has been great. Appreciate your time. And thanks for coming on today, Kim.
So nice to talk to you, Peter. Thank you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.